This is R2D Tech, and today we're going to be talking about the new Motorola Razr 2020, so stay tuned. So straight away, the packaging gives you a really good first impression of the product. It's really intricate and it's got lots of nice features. The main feature of the packaging is that it actually acts as a dock as well. And it's kind of rubberized as well, so it's not just a cheap plastic, but it can be used as a dock. And also they've put all the accessories in a hard shell sunglass style case, which I think is really cool. So you do get a 15-watt power brick, 1.5, not 5.0, which is a bit unfortunate, but then when you hear the battery size later on, you'll see why it might just be enough. But also you get a USB-C to headphone jack adapter because you don't unfortunately get a headphone jack. And finally, you of course get a USB-C cable, USB-C to USB-A, so you can charge the device. So in terms of the general design, this of course follows that classic clamshell design where you can unfold the device into a normal smartphone, and when it's folded up, it's very small and pocketable. I think this is definitely the future because it's really cool and very ergonomic. Now, of course, you have a small display on the outside for viewing notifications and things like that, whereas on the inside, when it's unfolded, you get the full smartphone display. Now, you do have a crease, but it's very unnoticeable because they've done a great job with the mechanism, and we'll get onto that in just a bit. Now, in terms of the hinge, it is spring-loaded, which makes it very satisfying to open and close, much like the original Motorola flip phones. And of course, it does have a mechanism in place to minimize the crease on the plastic display. And I think they do a much better job than this than Samsung at the moment. They do have some sort of backplate under the display which works to minimize the appearance of the crease. The last thing to mention in terms of design is that yes, there is quite a large notch, side bezels, and a very large chin. Now, lots of the phone's components are in that chin, so I'm not complaining. And also, there is actually quite a cool feature where the display will tuck into that bottom chin slightly when you're folding it to minimize the crease. Now, I personally don't take issue with any of these bezel sizes or anything like that, especially on a phone like this, which is all about folding and unfolding and showing off that new display technology. So personally, I don't think the thick bezels are a big issue, and neither do I think the notch is a big issue either. Moving on to the front display, which is the small one which you use when the phone is folded up. It's a 2.7-inch OLED panel, which is quite nice, and it is only a 600 by 800 pixel resolution. Now, I know this sounds very small indeed compared to some other normal size displays, but you do have to remember that the display is like that big, so you won't really notice the low resolution that much. Also, it's important to mention that you will mainly be using this display for things like looking at notifications and maybe the occasional selfie, just because it is so small. On the other hand, the main inner display is 6.2 inches and it's also OLED, so that's quite nice. The only downside is that I'm pretty sure it's still plastic, so there might be some durability concerns. The good thing about this clamshell design though is that unlike Samsung folding phones, there is no gap between the two sections of the display when you fold up the phone, so it's quite hard for things like small stones to actually get in there and damage the display. Now, this display is 876 by 2142 pixels. This isn't the highest resolution display we've seen. It is definitely better than 720p, but it's not quite 1080p. I guess it's slightly disappointing for the price point, which we'll get onto later. But again, it's new technology and I don't expect them to do anything crazy in terms of things like resolution or battery life or anything like that. Now, in terms of cameras, there is one main camera and then another selfie camera on the inside of the design. The main camera is probably the one you'll use all the time because it's 48 megapixels and it films up to 4K 30 frames per second. Now, the 48 megapixels is really nice, but of course it's all up to software processing nowadays. So whether or not the images will be great out of this are really up to software processing, which we'll have to test later on. Now, the 4K 30 FPS is slightly disappointing again for the price point. I do like to see 4K 60 frames per second on some phones, but I guess we're not getting it here. Now, in terms of that inner selfie camera, I don't really think you'll be using this much. It's only 20 megapixels, which is decent, but I'm guessing it won't be the best image quality. and also it only films up to 1080p 60 frames per second. It can't do 4K, so in terms of taking video, you'll definitely want to use the main lens on the back. Now, of course, though, the folding form factor does make this easier because you can use the small display on the front if you want to take a selfie with the main lens, and of course, if it's unfolded, you can always use the main sensor on the back in that case to take video or photo as well. So it's quite a versatile device, and you never really need to use the small lower megapixel camera on the inside. Now, of course, is software. You are getting Android 10 right out the box and quite a stock version of it as well. This is really nice. I really like Android 10. It's what I'm running on my OnePlus 6 at the moment. But of course, Android 11 is right around the corner. To be honest, I wouldn't expect to get this update anytime soon on the Motorola Razr, just because lots of Android devices, especially Motorola and other companies, have failed to update very quickly in the past. Of course, though, Android 10 is still a great operating system, and I really like stock Android as well, so it should be quite a nice experience. Now, with this phone, what's cool is that there are some extra software features. The main one being that if you're viewing a notification or an app on the small outer display, when you flip the phone open, it will automatically be open on the main display as well. I think it's called app continuity, but it's a really great feature to have. Now let's talk about specs. You are getting the Snapdragon 765G chipset with this device, which yes, is not the flagship chipset. It's definitely not the 865 or anything like that, but it is still pretty decent, and I wouldn't expect to see much lag or anything like that with this chipset. Of course, it's also 5G enabled, which doesn't mean much to me right now, but it does make the phone quite a bit more future-proof in the event that you do want to use 5G in the future. Now, in terms of storage, you're getting 256 gigabytes and no expandable storage. I always like to see expandable storage on phones, but I guess with a design like this, it's quite hard to fit things like that in, especially in the chin on the bottom. Now, I'm not complaining, 256 gigabytes is plenty, especially with the cloud options available nowadays like Google Drive or Google Photos. Now, in terms of RAM, you're getting 8 gigabytes of RAM, and this is perfectly sufficient, I think. Some other phones do offer like 12 gigabytes or 16 gigabytes of RAM, but to be honest, for a phone like this, which isn't really intended to be like a multitasking device or like a productivity device like the Surface Duo, I do think 8 gigabytes of RAM is perfectly sufficient. Moving on to I/O or input-output, it does seem that the speakers on this phone are actually pretty decent, or at least that's the general consensus in the tech community at the moment, which is quite rare to see something like that on one of these really small folding phones. But it's very nice to see, and it will make consuming content on things like YouTube or Spotify that much nicer on such a small, compact device. Now, you also get a SIM tray, of course no expandable storage as I said before, but it's nice to see the physical SIM tray on this device. Now, you also get a fingerprint sensor on the back, which before was on the chin, which I thought was a bit dodgy to be honest on the original model, but it is nice to see it on the back now, so when you flip the phone open, where your finger, your index finger naturally rests is where the fingerprint sensor will be, which is very convenient indeed. In terms of battery life, you are getting a 2800 milliamp hour battery, which yes does sound pretty ridiculously small in 2020, but I will defend it a bit since you are going to be using that small low resolution display on the front for things like notifications. That's not really going to drain much battery at all, but also the inner display is quite low resolution as well, or not very low resolution, but lower than some other phones we've seen this year. And also the refresh rate is 60 Hz, so it's not going to be a huge battery drainer like some of the Samsung phones we've seen this year. And for that reason, I think the 2800 milliamp hour battery might just be enough to get you through a full day. If not though, there are things like battery power saver mode because it is Android 10 and that will give you a little bit more battery, and also you have that 15 watt power brick in the box which can charge the small battery up quite quickly. Now, I would have liked to see a higher wattage charger because I know lots of other phones can charge at like 65 or even 120 watts these days, but I'm not going to complain too much because some other companies don't even provide such a high wattage power brick like 15 watts in the box anyway. and I'm pretty sure other companies like Apple are going to remove the power brick from the box altogether, so I'm not going to complain too much on that front. Overall, battery life won't be anything amazing, but it might just get you through the full day. Moving on though to colors, they have improved the selection slightly from the first time round. You can now choose between 3 options: liquid mercury, which is a lighter silver look and it's quite nice; polished graphite, which is a much darker look; and blush gold, which is a bit more adventurous but is also quite a nice look. Now the last thing to talk about, of course, is price, and this is where the phone slightly disappoints in my opinion. Now they haven't got the best specs in this device, and I understand that because they had to make some compromises to keep that really nice elegant form factor, but again, I would have liked them to reduce the price slightly because you're not getting the best specs. And it's priced around £1,400 or €1,400, and probably even more if you're in the US, which I think is too steep for what they're offering. Yes, you do have that folding OLED design, which some other companies charge quite a lot for as well, but on the other hand, Samsung have included flagship specs in their versions, and so that kind of justifies the higher price point, whereas Motorola haven't got the very best specs in their device, but they've got a slightly nicer design in my opinion. But I don't think that warrants a £1,400 price tag, and for that reason I can't really recommend this phone. In the future, maybe a third model, if they release like an £800 model or something like that, then I could definitely recommend it, and I'd definitely like to get my hands on something like that. But at the moment I'm finding it hard to recommend such an expensive device. Overall, I definitely like the device and the form factor, and I definitely like to see more models in the future, but just with a lower price point. If you did like this video, then please hit the thumbs up button because it does help with the algorithm, and if you want to see more content like this in the future, then definitely smash that subscribe button and notification bell below. Thanks, and see you next week.